that I started to remember reading about that article about the discovery of the tomb of Gilgamesh. I thought the timing is really interesting. I don't know what to make of all this. And so a lot of it was just sort of swirling around in my head, like little satellites around a planet. And over the ensuing years, I would hear things from people, trusted sources, about, they didn't just find the tomb, but they found the occupant of the tomb, and that he was in a remarkable state of preservation and was about 15 feet tall.
Welcome back to Blurry Creatures, Luke. You had your first live podcast. How do you feel about that?
Pretty good, Nate. Pretty good.
Tim, it was not a biblical wedding because Tim brought out the worst wine first.
They brought out the crap wine just to get people hammered, and that was us.
That was us. And Luke was wearing sweatpants.
They were nice sweatpants, though.
I just love it. We're like, hey, what are we doing today? Like, Luke, you dressed up for it. Dressed up for the event.
Just for the job I want.
We had a great time.
We did.
Tim was super rad, and so many people came. We almost sold all of our shirts. People were telling us the nicest stuff. I mean, dude, Luke, we got to do BlurryCon. We got to do it.
Yeah, we do. We got to get sweat towels and fog machines, maybe a DeLorean. All the things.
Exactly. We'll get an old telephone booth, and we'll just portal through and go.
Right. Exactly.
Back to 1985.
The only place to go. And then maybe back to 1955 to Hill Valley,
Speaking of going back, we're going back into our early catalog. We're bringing back the Dr. Judd Burton on this episode.
Dude, DJB is on the mend.
And he is on the mound, pitching us the goods.
That's right.
Pitching us the curveballs that only DJB knows how to throw.
And I'm excited about this one because we've actually been throwing around this idea for a few months because I find it to be very interesting and pertinent to the times we're in, and it has all of the earmarks of a Burton and beyond episode.
Yeah. We get into all things blurry. The Nephilim Kings, the tombs of the Nephilim Kings. I think that's probably going to get better on the search ratings, Luke. So we got to name it.
Tombs of the God Kings.
No, I don't think it's going to get. It's not going to peak in the old charts like Tomb of the Nephilim Kings will.
Okay, I like it, Nate.
All right,
I like where your head's at, pal.
And if you want to get up in the charts of our hearts,
I do. I like that. If you want to cannonball into our pool of love,
become a gold member right now, Luke. Did you tell them?
Become a gold member.
That's right.
Yes. Austin Powers.
So we made some memes and we put it on the Facebook group, and so many people have already jumped up to the next level. We're going to do some cool things for a lot of people who came to us at the conference, and they're like, hey, how can we help you guys even more? We don't want you to stop the Blurry Fury. How do we help? And I didn't know what to say. I was like, maybe we can offer some more things to fans and members of the show. And so we're going to offer a gold membership, $15 a month. You get access to the Discord, and we're really going to utilize this Discord, which is basically like a streaming platform and a chat platform. Some of you guys use similar platforms at work. And there's threads and there's tiers. So if you're a gold member, you get gold status on the Discord, and then you get access to things. And we're going to watch some documentaries together. We're going to give you guys access to maybe watch us interview some of your favorite guests.
Yeah.
In the live.
Yes, definitely not in the nude, but also in the live. Yes. No, but to be able to kind of sit in be a fly on the wall in some of our interviews, and it really helps us. You still can be a member for $7 a month at the silver level, but we wanted to provide another tier and some more options for people that really, really want to go all in and give up 2 coffees a month.
Yeah, get wild.
2 coffees for cryptids. That's what we're calling it, huh? Besides calling it gold members. No, but
coffee for cryptids.
We can't thank everybody enough for showing up and showing out at the Birthright Conference this last weekend with Tim. I know Nate was encouraging and surprising. I know we've said this a bunch of times, but it's kind of crazy. What's happened and where this thing has gone when just two dummies start asking questions and want to start a Bigfoot podcast. But you guys have been amazing. The community is incredible. If you're not a part of the community, I think you need to experience this. So check it out. You can go to our webpage and check out to join and become a member. We're thankful for everybody that is at all levels. So buy T-shirts, listen to Blurry Creatures,
and you shipped them,
and roll that time cop. I shipped all of them.
What a wild man.
Dude, I had the 80s pumping. I even had Mike and the Mechanics going in the background.
Yeah. That's right. I'm editing episodes. Luke's packing shirts. We are nonstop Blurry Creatures. We've caught the fever. We hope you catch the fever. We're gonna have probably next year. We're gonna do BlurryCon. I felt it. I felt the juice. Tim came up to me after the show and he's after the conference. He's like, "Dude, I think half the people here were here for Blurry Creatures," and I was like, "Who knew?" But yeah, echo what Luke said. Absolutely incredible. Blown away at the community here. So go to blurrycreatures.com/members, become a member, hang out with us in the Discord. Let's get on to DJB.
So welcome back to the show, the incomparable and the very recently missing but now found Dr. Judd Burton.
Well, thank you guys, everyone out there from the bottom of our hearts. Blurry Creatures, 2 years in. Who knew? This is a wild ride, and happy to have you on the team supporting the podcast. Let's get Dr. Judd Burton on the show.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
We are on the Judd hotline. We're going old school. We're going coast to coast tonight with Judd Burton.
Coast to coast.
So we are.
I kind of there was something magical, Luke, about a phone call and a radio show in the middle of the night listening to Coast to Coast, like hearing a guy call in. You know?
Yeah, I used to listen to it with my dad.
Yeah.
On late night driving back from my grandma's. Oh yeah, I loved it.
It got me through graduate school.
It was the intro into the Blurry verse, you know. It was like,
yeah.
And I don't know what I thought then. I just thought it was a bunch of wackos, but it was so entertaining. I mean, probably was half the time. But should we kick this off, Nate?
We should kick this off. Welcome back to Blurry Creatures, the one and only, the myth, the man, the legend, from Lonely Mountain himself, DJB, Dr. Judd Burton. I don't know if he's going to be singing tonight, guys, but he's been MIA.
You just never know. You never know.
You never know, Luke, when the man will sing.
The world needs a song from Judd, you know? It just doesn't seem right. Judd, it's great to have you back.
It is great.
I know that you are probably, without it, not even probably, you are by far the most beloved guest that we have on Blurry Creatures. I can say that because I know how much of an outpouring there was, like just in our Facebook as a litmus test for you, and when you ended up having to go to the hospital. So everybody is very, very glad that you're here. You're still on this side with us. You're still gonna rock the Blurry verse, and that and that you're on the mend. And I know that people would probably want a little bit of an update if you don't mind giving one. And you don't have to go into a ton of detail, but just let everybody know how you're doing. And because I know they ask a lot. in the member stuff. So
yeah, and that hits me square in the heart. Everybody in the Blurryverse thinks about me like that, and it's just 115% reciprocated. I love all you guys, and I am kind of in the second phase of my recovery right now. Well, the big thing was a mobility issue stemming from older injuries in my legs. There's some other things that went along with it, but that's basically what I'm getting physical therapy and rehab for right now. It's kind of a long haul, but I am on the mend. I continue to heal, and strength and all that is getting better. So I appreciate all of the prayers and thoughts and good messages that people have been sending out. I'm just thoroughly blessed by all that.
Yeah. We had us worried, Judd. We were we had the search party ready. We were sending people out. Felt like
I know it, man. I wasn't doing anything on social media because I was in such a malaise at the time, which is why I've told a number of people, think that there was a definite spiritual side to this. Just given the nature of my calling and the fight that we're in, and my members of my family and my friends have echoed the same sentiments and observations. So it was a pretty tough sling, and arrow this time around.
Yeah,
but,
100%. We
had Doug Van Dorn on the trail. We had Derek Gilbert on the trail.
Yeah.
We were looking. We were looking for you, Judd. So we're thrilled to have you back, and we're thrilled to be talking about what we're going to talk about tonight, because I know this is something that we have been mulling around. Yeah, even before your health issues arose, we were talking about wanting to put together an episode on
the Tomb of the God Kings.
The Tomb of the God Kings. And talk about Nimrod and Romulus and just the fascinating connections that you can pull between those and some world events.
Yeah, Judd, we're happy. And we, Luke, I will say one last thing. I was going to say all that. I was a little bit frightened because just to echo what Judd was saying, we've had a lot of members, past members and guests. Been a lot of crazy things that have happened to some guests on our show. There's just a lot. There's been a lot of darts being thrown.
We lost Rob Skiba and Doug Riggs. Yeah.
Yeah, we've within the past year we've lost people like Rob Skiba and Russ Dizdar and
Doug Riggs and Heiser's got cancer. There's just a lot of wild stuff going on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, if anything, it reminds us that the battle we're in is real. You can't talk about these things, minister about these things, study these things, help people with these things, and not expect to take some fire, pretty significant fire at sometimes.
It's a good thing you're one of the men in the fight, because Judd don't back down. That's what we know.
To quote Hank Williams Jr., a country boy can't survive.
Oh yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Judd, we have a lot of episodes to record with you, so Luke and I were going to freaking come down there and kick some doors down,
right?
Get shotguns of ivermectin and just come flying in.
Makes no sense.
Shotguns and ivermectin. If that's not a country song I've been making, I don't know.
Dude.
Just shotguns loaded with ivermectin and HCQ. Let's go.
Ouch.
Let's get the good doc, put him on the time machine, and get the hell out of here.
That's right? probably not the safest method of delivery, but okay.
Metaphorical shotguns.
I think we're gonna doing a full Davy Crockett. We're gonna tell everybody you may all go to hell, and I will go to Texas. That's right. We're coming.
Look at you. Well, Judd, it's great to have you back on the Blurry Creatures, and I know you're back when you're posting the memes. I'm like, there he is. Yeah. He's back. Yep. He's feeling the juice.
There's a few. I think the last one was a Goonies one.
It was.
Yeah. Do you officially have the juice, Judd?
Yeah, it's back.
All right. So maybe give us a little bit of a opening line about, we say Tomb of the God Kings, and our listeners, and even us dummies, don't really know what you're talking about, maybe, exactly when you say that.
Well, as intelligent as my host and the audience are, I find that hard to believe, but I'm happy to talk about it. One of the episodes we did, I guess it was last year maybe, or earlier. Yeah, it was last year. It was right after I wrote that paper on Eurasian words, Eurasian languages, and the influence that the Rephaim had on words that we use for king and ruler and prince and stuff like that. And so this is kind of a related study and an extension of that, really, something I've been keeping my eye on for quite some time, almost 20 years now. Going back to the model of political manipulation and cultural engineering that the Watchers and the Nephilim and then the post-flood Rephaim imposed on mankind, this model of a highly centralized government with initially a literal god king, because they set themselves up as the first rulers of these city-states that eventually became empires. Again, they took the model of a good, just, perfect king, in the form of Yahweh, and just like the demonic always does, they took it and turned it on its head and twisted it. And that became the great social and political shift at the end of the Neolithic period, when you have sites like Göbekli Tepe and Tel Caramel and Natufi and Jericho, and some later ones in their wake like Chatal Hayot, and even some in Egypt during the late Pleistocene, anywhere between 10,000 and 8,000 BC. I'm basically building off of that supposition, that theory, that model. And there's, even in secular circles, there's some, there's evidence that, that notion is not far off the mark, because virtually all of the earliest post-flood civilizations, like Mesopotamia and Egypt and the Indus River Valley, and this is true of basically every religious backdrop within a civilization in its infancy, is that they're all theocratic monarchies. In other words, the king was the political and religious leader, and was often considered to be divine or semi-divine himself, or some sort of messenger between humanity and the gods. And we see this played out, again and again. Probably the most iconic example would be the Egyptian pharaohs, who were considered to be deified, and one form or the other, and some, incarnation or avatar of, most often, Ra. But this model was something that the Watchers and then a certain portion of the post-flood giants continue. The Watchers begin it, and their forebears continue it, and so that really becomes the bedrock of what we're talking about today. I think in terms of the god kings that we're referring to are not human entirely. They're partially human, but they're not entirely human.
These are the heroes, right, Judd? These are like the
men of renown.
Yeah, the men of renown.
Yes.
The hybrid sons or sons or progeny of the Watchers.
Right. Exactly.
And we talked about Nimrod. I know we're gonna start with that just because it's chronological, but we talked about him. Nate, we've talked in a few episodes, and I know Judd, we've probably covered it with you as well, about how the Bible talks about how he became a Gabor, like he became this, essentially a Nephilim, the same idea,
turned into a hybrid.
Which is strange, yeah. Like in a sense, because whatever was happening then, and we can probably, hypothetically surmise that there was something going on where he was able to do that, and then of course we know that he led the, and I'm jumping ahead a bit, but he led the peoples into the, into the creation of Babylon, Tower of Babel, all those things. So, so I want to just lay that out, just confirm with you that you were talking about, these hybrid progeny of the Watchers, and or essentially the same idea, a mixing of the human and angelic DNAs.
That's right.
It's interesting to think that that's where we get that from. Why do we choose a king? Why did people allow kings and queens?
Yeah, well, again, that goes back to actually some of the work that Dr. Aaron Judkins and myself have done on Göbekli Tepe about, for most of human history, we've been nomads and hunter-gatherers and horticulturalists of one sort or another. And then this shift takes place, like I said, at the end of the Pleistocene, the end of the what would have been the Mesolithic period. I think I said Neolithic. I meant Mesolithic. Beginning of the Neolithic period is this shift in social organization, which is a 90-degree angle change in the cultural trajectory of humanity. Now, that doesn't mean that every human social group, every population on the planet at that time opted to organize themselves along those lines. It was initially just the ones that had this contact with the Watchers and the Nephilim and in the post-flood world that idea was rebooted. So why would people choose a king? Well, that system, in my mind, is imposed on humanity by the Watchers in this, this attempt to culturally engineer and control and change the direction that humanity was heading, all for their own purposes, which ran counter to what, God had in store for humanity. God still manages to work through that system for His will and for good, but that, from everything that I've studied and researched, for the past several years, that really seems to be, the case because, and you've got, on the one hand, you've got you've got humanity, which couldn't really defend themselves against whatever the Watchers wanted to do with them or to them. And this system is pretty readily and easily imposed on humanity. And, it's still with us today.
I was going to say, to me, it seems like a lot of what the enemy and sort of the strategy of the enemy was at the same time, right? You have this replication of what's happened, this corrupt counterfeit of what's happening in heaven, right? We know that heaven is to be a kingdom where God is worshipped as King of Kings. Mm-hmm. And it seems, it just in the way that we talk about the fallen heaven and the rebellion and the desire of these angels to be worshipped like God. So mm-hmm. they set themselves up here in the same hierarchy, mm-hmm. in the same position, but in a corrupt counterfeit version of what we see in the heavenlies. And then I think about when we went through the Rapha, right? The tracing of the word all the way back, and you touched on it just a little bit earlier, but like the idea that all of our words for king find its origin in Rephaim, which of course is a hybrid, and you have these all roads trace back to
ground zero,
to this original set. Yeah, well, it's the setting up of the fallen angels and their progeny to be worshipped as God is worshipped, into the corruption of God's creation, into the bastardization, to the destruction of the image bearers of the one true king, right? It makes a ton of sense to me. Like I think everything we have is that's bad is a bad counterfeit, of God's order and God's creation and in God's hierarchy.
You see how carefully woven in to our social systems, our culture, that all of this stuff is. It's so subtle that it doesn't occur. It's not immediately forthcoming that something like a king, has origins in something that's not only supernatural but is wicked mm-hmm. and twisted. And this is just one word, one cognate, one concept that we're talking about here. If they could do that with a political system, a social system, and one word, what statistical likelihood that there's so much else that they help craft in our culture that we wouldn't on the surface attribute to them.
Do you think, if we think about the kingdoms and principalities and territories, do you think that these god kings had sort of almost like an invisible fence where their influence worked and kind of shaped the minds of the people in a certain area, and then if you got out of that, you were more of a nomadic type person? You weren't under the influence?
That's a possibility, I think. I think that kind of imagery is probably apt in describing the influence these kings. But in the case of the three examples that we're talking about tonight, especially two of them, we're talking about not just the sort of hierarchy like Paul talks about, in Ephesians, but we're talking about direct contact, with the people, in the cases of Nimrod and Romulus and even Osiris.
So let's get into that, because I think it's
okay.
It's funny, like this almost feels like it's ripped from like a script of Indiana Jones almost, right? Like you have think about the Ark of the Covenant, right? You have these sources or believed sources of power that the modern empires are trying to acquire in order, it would have seemed and appeared to be, in order to harness whatever sort of power, these relics and this knowledge, maybe these associations with the god kings, whatever kind of power those relics may hold, right? And so this discussion begins with Nimrod, and take us down what happened there, because I think that we're going to see, and I know you've laid this out, especially on Facebook, is where you put it out there, and I thought it was just fascinating and wanted to really unwrap this. But it begins with Iraq and the tomb of Nimrod being discovered. Right.
Well, I should probably go back to where my story begins.
Yeah.
When I interfaced with this,
it's been 84 years.
In 2003, in '03, I was a young graduate student. I was finishing my master's degree in anthropology at Tech, and I was just excited about everything, and everything was new, and I was working in a heritage foundation. I was the genealogist and research historian for this heritage foundation. So a lot of what I did was genealogical work. But I came in that one morning in March of 2003 and set my coffee down and sat down at the computer, flipped my news ticker on, and I saw that there was a story from the BBC about the discovery of the tomb of Gilgamesh. I thought, that's interesting. By then, we knew that Gilgamesh was not necessarily a literary device, because, of course, we had the King's List, but it had never crossed my mind they would be able to find a tomb or something like that. But that was the headline on this story, and so I clicked on it and read it, and it detailed how a consortium of archaeologists had located what they believed was the tomb of Gilgamesh. And I thought, that's a pretty significant find, considering the literary sconce that the Gilgamesh epic occupies in world literature. I just sort of followed it away. And, not knowing some of the things that I would hear years and years after that about not just finding the tomb, but potentially finding the occupant of the tomb. But suffice to say, 6 weeks later, the invasion of Iraq began. And I thought the timing was really interesting. I remember sitting down, I think it was maybe the first or second week that the coalition forces were in Iraq, that I started to remember reading about that article. I thought, the timing is really interesting. I don't know what to make of all this. And so a lot of it was just sort of swirling around in my head, like little satellites around a planet. And over the ensuing years, I would hear things from people, trusted sources, about, they didn't just find the tomb, but they found the occupant of the tomb, and he was in a remarkable state of preservation and was about 15 feet tall. About 15 feet tall. He was airlifted in an operation back to the States. And there were other curious things that I found that were news pieces and commentary on on what had happened, and even from some, military personnel that had been there, that one of the things that I found really curious, or two things that I'll bring to bear here. One of those things is that supposedly the United States was charged with guarding the Baghdad Museum to keep looters from, because they had already busted in, but to keep looters from looting the Baghdad Museum. And to my knowledge, we only had a spec ops team there for about half an hour to an hour, and then they were done. They left, which tells me that they got in and got out with whatever it is they were looking for, and the specificity of what they were looking for must have been pretty high. And the second thing is that not just the Army, but I think all branches that were on the ground had a deck of cards that they were given, kind of along the lines of the death cards that they used in Vietnam. But these weren't death cards; they were artifact cards. And there was a very specific hierarchy and topology and list of things that they were on the lookout for. Commanding officers were on the lookout for, and these were dispersed amongst certain contingents of troops to be on the lookout for them. And although the Army has archaeologists, a lot of what they do is salvage and a lot of stateside stuff. So it's pretty clear to everybody that the Army's their primary purpose is not archaeology. Right. In other words, they don't have standing orders to all their personnel to be on the lookout for certain antiquities. And I found that rather curious that they went to those lengths to hand out these cards, a deck of which I'd really like to get my hands on, if anybody's out there and knows where one of them is.
They were in the envelopes at George Bush's funeral. Okay.
Well, that solves that mystery.
That's where they put them.
So that's not I'm not being hyperbolic about this stuff. I mean that particularly with the cards, that was stuff that I had read in several articles. It's not something that they were keeping secret, but in the context of all of this, I found it highly suspect.
Judd, for me, it just fits exactly what we know to be true about what Hitler and Himmler were doing. With their obsession with the occult, for one, they're open occultists, and then also they were looking for relics that they thought would give them more power in the occult, right? And I, we joke about Indiana Jones, but in that the Nazis are doing the same thing. They have an archaeologist employed, the Army's on the ground, they're trying to find these relics of power.
Mm-hmm.
It just isn't about movies. It's funny, I pulled up a couple articles when you were talking about this, and it's interesting, like you say, that in spite of us, the U.S. being there to protect the contents of the tomb of Nimrod, there was initial reports of 170,000 pieces stolen. They put that down to somewhere of 1,000 pieces maybe stolen, but you read this, and when you in light of what you're saying, and probably just in light of where we are in 2022, and be like, this is from 2003. And you're thinking, of course, yeah, they're lost, in air quotes. These things were stolen in air quotes. It's and the fact that the reporting is they're looking for specific things. Like, what do you think? What do you surmise if they're airlifting allegedly the body of Nimrod out of Iraq and into the States, and they have at least 52 things they're looking for? If you talk about a deck of cards, right? What do you think they're looking for, and what do you think the purpose is with perhaps the body of Nimrod, and then also these things that they were looking for? Like, I mean, we've had, we were all younger men in 2003. We've learned a lot, I think, maybe in at least the last 4 or 5 years. The globalists have really been exposed, but I think we know they were operating here. What do you think they're doing or looking for specifically, and what do you think their purposes with Nimrod and his body?
That is a disturbing question to ponder. I think your allusion to Hitler and Himmler and the general Nazi agenda of sort of creating the Übermensch, the superbeing, none of that research really stopped because we gave all the scientists that would be most helpful to us a pardon after all the Nazi scientists after World War II, and then we hired them under the auspices of Project Paperclip. And there have been researchers and writers, notably people like Jim Mars, who've argued, I think, rather convincingly, supported by a document trail, that the agenda of the Third Reich, and at least in that capacity, never really stopped. It was just sort of transferred to the United States. And transfer may be a loose term to use as well, since a lot of those ideologies started, in the States to begin with. I mean, Hitler praised American eugenicists for, basically laying the bedrock for the Nazi regime and his philosophy. And a lot of the socialists and communists that became instrumental in the creation of the Soviet Union, a lot of those guys were trained in New York City. So it's almost like the chickens coming home to roost. At any rate, there's a definite agenda here using this, Watcher tech, Nephilim tech, for some nefarious agenda. And for those who are familiar with, the workings of the globalists or the Illuminati, whatever appellation you want to stick on them, we're just talking about compartments of the same organization, which is, of course, thoroughly satanic. And is why I say that, pondering the possibilities of the question you pose, Luke, is pretty disturbing and frightening on some level as to what they would do with the actual physical remains of Gilgamesh, who I should have stated at the beginning, we're equating with Nimrod here, and there have been scholars who have made a pretty convincing case for that. So I'm not going to retread that tire, only to say that, if people are interested in that, they can certainly look that research up. And I wrote an entire chapter about Nimrod and Gilgamesh in Interview with the Giant, which people can look up if they'd like. But suffice to say, that's the argument that we're making here, is that it's the same personage. As to what some of these other artifacts may be, I suspect that a lot of them are probably bas-relief or cuneiform cylinders that contain, and I'm just making an educated guess here.
Sure.
I don't have a lot to go, but I would suspect that that the information contained, on inscriptions and things like that, contain the necessary knowledge, about this Watcher tech, rather than actual physical artifacts. I mean, those are physical artifacts, but what is significant about them is the writing and information that they contain. And that doesn't mean, that you couldn't have artifacts that were, demonically charged or something that would have been crucial to whatever agenda they had. So I think it's going to be a mix of things, and I think they're artifacts that would slip under the so-called radar because they're rather innocuous, particularly the cylinder seals. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have an immense cultural value for that part of the world. Of course they do, but you would think that, what did they do? Did they find a, Stargate technology or something there that they're bringing back? I don't know. I don't know for sure, but my suspicion is that they're more interested in the information that's been preserved in writing.
I mean, you got to think too that if they're after the body, right, they're after DNA. It seems like everything in this show comes back to that, right? That's
the other
seed war stuff. Yeah.
Over the years, Luke, we've gotten a bunch of those emails, people saying that there was like requesting documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, the location of his body. There was like something was on the email servers.
Oh, that's right.
And there was some talk about buried Nephilim as well. That was kind of a rumor. I don't know if that's like too conspiracy theory, but something about the servers connected to the Clintons and something about Gilgamesh. And we probably had 10 people send us that over the year. 2 years we've been podcasting. And I don't know if that's too off the
Well,
trails.
I don't completely discount anything. I can't confirm or deny that, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility. I mean, I until I can see a convincing argument one way or the other, I'm going to say that it's, that's possible, and it wouldn't surprise me.
So we invade. We as the U.S. invade. We take control of, and we take what we need. And then just like much everything else of sort of dubious origins, it disappears into wherever, the dumbs, Nate, or to secured places that are run with black operations and dark money and all these things that sounded like conspiracy theories for a long time. We all just find out all this stuff is true. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I think it continues to get crazy because there was yet another tomb found, right? Judd, the next one, as we're moving sort of in chronological order, would have been in 2015.
Right.
They find the tomb of Osiris.
The Osiris tomb, which is another interesting find. It's actually from the 25th dynasty, which is late. So in terms of the chronology that the tomb itself dates back to, we're talking like 7th or 6th century BC, which is,
right.
That's very, very late New Kingdom. But what's significant about it, and may tie us back to an earlier time, is the fact that this tomb is an exact replica of the tomb, the chamber of Osiris in Egyptian mythology. And you typically don't see that. In fact, we've never seen that before in all the tombs that have been excavated in the Valley of the Kings and other parts of Egypt. You just don't see that. And so to my mind, that poses some questions. Is there some sort of lineal connection here with the actual Osiris? And I'll tell you a little bit about who I think Osiris was, in addition to being part of the Egyptian pantheon and the god of the dead, god of the underworld. Sort of has a Rephaim vibe to it anyway. But there are really two main prevailing theories about the unification of Egypt that took place, sometime prior to 3100 BC, when you start to see the first kings of Egypt, and this is before the pharaonic dynasties. But one theory is that Upper and Lower Egypt. So you have to remember, before the fourth millennium, or for even part of the fourth millennium, before the dynasties, the kings and the dynasties began, Egypt was tribal. It was like most other places on the surface of the earth. The people were nomadic, or they were hunter-gatherers, or horticulturalists. A lot of nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples, depending on where they were in Egypt. But we're talking about a late Mesolithic, early Neolithic tribes, and they remained so. That system remained in place even after the emergence of pre-flood civilization. It remained in place in the post-flood era, the early post-flood era, until you get to the fourth millennium BC, and you have the unification of these tribes under one banner. And the two prevailing scholarly theories is that, one, this was an internal unification, so that one of the tribal chieftains that had become most powerful and rallied a pretty good portion of those tribes under his banner, and then subjugated the rest. And the other theory is that an individual came from outside of Egypt, either Mesopotamia or southern Anatolia, and this conqueror was responsible for unifying Egypt. And there have been a number of people who have posited that this was Osiris, whether it was internal or external. Now, certainly, if we're dealing with if he's the first god king of the Egyptians, we're dealing with somebody who's got divine and even potentially human pedigree. And I say human pedigree because all of the myths about Osiris allude to him being physically killed, and he's put together by Isis and her sister-in-law Nephis, and they basically go find all of his parts that have been chopped up.
They don't find one, though. They can't find one of them.
No, they can't find his genitals, and they have to fashion a golden phallus, which he after they reanimate him in Frankenstein sort of style, he impregnates Isis, and their son Horus is born. There's some interesting, even transhumanist kind of elements to the story itself. But again, the fact that this tomb is an exact replica of Osiris's chamber in the underworld, and I don't know that anybody's written about it yet. I haven't seen anything, but waiting for a lot of this research to get published. But To me, that says a lot about the burial itself and that particular line in the 25th dynasty. Are they saying that there's some sort of connection here? And, just like most excavations, they're not open to the public until there's a period of time that passes so that the archaeologists and researchers can do their thing and draw their initial conclusions about it, during which time, any number of things can happen. And I'll leave that to people's, own supposition and imagination. But the uncovering of this tomb, I think, is significant because of its connection to Osiris, who ostensibly was one of these god kings, maybe even the first of these supposedly nameless kings that unified Upper and Lower Egypt.
It's crazy too, because to read about this guy, right? Like, obviously the god of the dead and the afterlife and the underworld, but the way he's depicted is having bright emerald green skin, a pharaoh's beard, legs wrapped like a mummy. Like, he has these almost reptilian kind of strange attributes. And I've even heard some people say, and I can't confirm or deny this, but I have heard people say that the skin of the recovered Gilgamesh was kind of bluish in tint.
It makes you wonder how are these god kings connected and how are they not connected? You wonder if these guys are working together, are they working separate? I mean, or is it sort of just some chaos and each for themselves? I think that's the confusing part, is that you wonder, you think that they were all working together for some evil demise, but maybe they weren't. Maybe they were independently doing their own debauched civilization.
Well, I think that's what made them useful to the enemy, is that they were so selfishly devoted to their own agendas. They were kind of like useful idiots, as Lenin, called most of his followers. I don't think that they were necessarily working together because, you have to remember that in the post-flood period, there are many tribes and clans of giants, and they all have their own respective culture and, in many cases, a language. I'm sure that they all understand that they have a similar origin, but their character traits and their culture dictate a lot of their behavior. And, this sort of despotic, highly centralized autocracy that we see combined with religious fervor is, that's borne out in the secular scholarship, and it certainly seems to be borne out in, research that's been done on the giants and the Nephilim and the Watchers.
I think it's fascinating that they're finding this stuff, right? And there's correlating sort of things that happen now. And one of the things you pointed out, that there was sort of a large scale massacre of Coptic Christians upon the discovery of the tomb of Osiris. It just seems like, again, too coincidental to not be related.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I think that the timing of all these finds are significant, because they're, in the case of the Gilgamesh tomb, you've got they're accompanied by intense violence, the warfare of the second Gulf War, the Iraqi War, and then all of the violence during the Arab Spring, and in the wake of the Arab Spring taking place in places like Egypt when this tomb was found. So that is an interesting observation. I think it's suspect and probably speaks to the underlying demonic activity that's taking place during all, these kinds of events.
First off, I wanted to read the description, because I think for our listeners to understand this tomb, I've got one here. It says that all of the elements recalling the mythical Osiris tomb are present. Writes the Luxor Times. It's a big staircase, 3.5 meters long, with a 4-meter high ceiling at the bottom leading to the netherworld, and another one leading directly to the Osiris statue, which is therefore at a higher level and ideally isolated on his island. The Osiris statue itself, the empty corridor surrounding it, which symbolizes the channel of water, the expected burial chamber below the statue, thus identifying the deceased with Osiris. In the funerary room stands carved reliefs of demons holding knives. That's what they found. So my question for you is, we talk about this being 25th dynasty and, a replica. Why do you think that they moved his body? That's maybe what the first thing I think of, that they had to recreate the tomb for whatever reason, and they recreated it in the same way that it was done, and perhaps they relocated Osiris and his funerary belongings or treasure. Is that what you would think is happening with this, since the timing is off? And
I think so.
And so secondarily, much like we saw with Nimrod and Gilgamesh, we know that Egypt has a ton of British influence, right? It was in fact somewhat colonized. What do you think happened to these things? Because it doesn't ever mention any of the, if it was uncovered and discovered here, it doesn't talk about any of the contents. I mean, not surprisingly, it just talks about the aspects that I read right there of what the tomb looked like.
Yeah, this tomb, although the archaeological work on it is recent, I think the tomb may have actually been discovered in like 1887 or something, which is when Egypt was under the British mandate, and the Levant was too. So yeah, and you're talking about the infancy of archaeology and museum science, museum practice at the time. Of course, the remaining empires of the world basically saw the cultural heritage of these places as items to put in museums and pilfer. They weren't really concerned about leaving it in the Middle East. But obviously, a lot of those artifacts from that era ended up in places like the British Museum and scattered throughout other museums in Europe as well, the Louvre, Berlin. So it just, it stands to reason that there's still stuff out there that may be hiding in basements in some cases. And I've talked about this before. There are plenty of mundane artifacts that go missing in museums because basements are always shuffled. But the flip side of that coin is true as well. Who knows what's sitting in a museum basement that has direct bearing on what we're talking about tonight.
Who knows what's in the Smithsonian as well, right? Speaking of museum basements.
Right? There's a familiar theme, right, Luke?
Yeah. And I find this fascinating too, just the Osiris thing, Judd, that we know that the United States, for a great example, there is a lot of Isis and Osiris symbolism that exists in our capital, and there are a lot of ceremonies, including the raising of Osiris, done by the Masons in our capital. There's, I mean, you can't deny. It's weird. I don't know how you ignore that.
Yeah, you can't really. It's the influence of the ancient and classical worlds on our monuments, and I mean, it's just right in your face.
Do you feel like, Judd, that for the most part, there are no coincidences? These entities still have influence. It's just the public at large, the masses are sort of blind to it, but the elites, they know, and that's why they're going around. They're all connected. They have the history of these occult ties, and they're looking for specific things, and they're doing ceremonies, and it's this knowledge that they have that we don't have, and we get these little symbols here and there, and we get some clues that they're doing this, but maybe the ancient world, it was much more obvious. It was on the surface, and now it's just more hidden. Behind the scenes, behind the curtain. Yeah,
well, I mean, I think scholars and researchers and colleagues like Dr. Heiser have pointed out quite well that the ancient peoples didn't look at this stuff the way that we do for the most part. They believed that they were in it. It was all around them. They were directly interfacing with it. And I think in many cases that's true not only supernaturally but physically too. With the existence of these tribes of giants, and out of whose numbers came these god kings that we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that we have modern peoples that are still trying to raise or harness the powers or the spirits of the hybrids, right? It's just it's bananas.
Yeah. And misguided though they may be, they understand that. They understand that mindset. That we live in a supernatural reality. I mean, we as Christians understand that too, but for diametrically opposed purposes.
We talked to Derek Gilbert a lot about Apollyon and the Abyss, and the Watchers being imprisoned. and yet still having this ability to communicate. And when we see people who obviously nefariously connected with darkness that are essentially trying to raise the progeny of these imprisoned watchers, if we're to sort of follow that trail from the watchers to the god kings and to the hybrids, and which would be the offspring, or even the Rephaim, right? These grandchildren, great grandchildren of the watchers, and it almost feels like from the abyss, the watchers are still trying to, resurrect, reincarnate, bring back to their own ends, their own progeny or descendants, which is bizarre.
Yeah, I believe that they are. And, some people will argue that they don't have any influence because they are imprisoned. Well, the analogy that I use is that think of all the mafia dons and cartel leaders that get imprisoned, and they still control things.
They still run. They still run it. Yeah, they still run it from prison. Yeah.
I mean, let's get weird here. Do you think they're trying to break in, get them out, open portals, use CERN, trying to crack into hell and get them out?
Yeah, why not?
I mean, if you think about it,
that's like Revelation 9 chapter stuff. Chapter 9 stuff.
Jailbreak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying it from my understanding on the show, there's a moment when God will let them out.
Yeah.
But what if they try to make that early and break themselves out of jail?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're always trying to work against, from the beginning, they've tried to work against God's timing, right?
Mm-hmm. You think that's why history might be barreling on as long as it has?
Well, I think in part, but I think it also is tied with, what the New Testament calls the fullness of the Gentiles, when as many people as possible can have heard the gospel, or when God says, okay, that's enough, you've had enough time to hear the message and choose a side, basically. When that time is, I don't know. I don't know. I think prolonging that is kind of, to a perceived stalemate, is kind of what the demonic views as a victory. But, they can't stop that, though, because it's already said it's prophetically set in stone. When that will happen, who knows? Because I think the last statistic I saw about people on the earth who have not heard the gospel, it's still something like 35%. So,
wow.
I don't know,
You would think with the connectivity and the internet and the mass communication that.
Well, and I think that's what accelerated the process, but there are still people that are basically living a Stone Age existence.
Yeah, there are.
In remote parts of the world.
What makes you think that these entities must still have some kind of influence? The communication and the hierarchy, clearly something is being communicated, and there are minions running around.
Right.
And clearly there are humans that are involved in the affairs of these entities.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more this show barrels on, and the more you look into any conspiracy theory, these elites, they're getting information from somewhere. Yeah. And they have some sort of goal. I mean, we've seen that in the last 2 or 3 years. It's obvious that people are pulling the strings, and it's not a very big group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's orchestrated events. There's orchestrated people that are running countries. And despite thousands and thousands of protests, they're still sticking to the narrative. And you have people literally boycotting and organizing these protests all over the world. And the politicians, it's like they have a gun to their head with a narrative. And anyone with half a brain can smell it. And you got to think, okay, who's the guy behind that guy? And does it go all the way back to these God Kings? Are they still influencing the top dogs on the pyramid?
Well, of course they are, from the Watchers on down to the lowliest demons, because remember, the spirits of the giants are unclean spirits, and they have the most direct influence in the world. And arguably, they would have to fall somewhere in the rank and file of one of these Watchers.
So you think the Watchers can communicate to the demons, and the demons can then run messages to the elites?
I think so. Now, the means by which that takes place, I don't know. I have suppositions to developing into research-based theories. I'd rather not share right now, but it's clear that the lines of communication are open. I don't
exactly.
I don't see how you could come to any other conclusion.
Yeah, and when you sorry to get weird here, but when you see things like Bohemian Grove, we've talked about that a little bit. Are they just doing a ceremonial thing, or are they actually trying to communicate directly?
No, I don't think that it's ceremonial. I mean, it is ceremonial, but it's the whole purpose of the ritual is to make that contact.
And how much contact do you think they have? They get?
I think that they get quite a bit. You know, they're all on a need-to-know basis, and they get what they need to know.
Well,
but I think it's a lot.
Judd, there's a third tomb.
Mm-hmm.
In 2020, of all the things that happened in 2020 to distract everybody from what's happening out here, there was yet another tomb discovered.
Yeah.
The tomb of Romulus was found underneath
the Palatine, the Forum, and right there in the Forum.
So tell us about who's Romulus. Talk about a little bit why this is important and what might have been surrounding this.
Yeah, Romulus was according to Roman myth, along with his brother Remus, was the founder of Rome, the city and empire of Rome. And really kind of a strange story. Livy articulates it the best, I think, in his early history of Rome, but there are other, poets and antiquarians and things like that have written during the Roman period that wrote about it. But Romulus is a central figure in Roman mythology and veneration, but is really kind of the founding father of Rome, and his story is a really strange one. His father was the god Mars, who, so many of these stories go, took a liking to a human female, a Vestal virgin, a priestess named Rhea Silvia, who was actually the granddaughter of one of the early Latin cities. So we're talking about a line of kings here. At any rate, Mars comes down and rapes Rhea Silvia, and the product of that union are these twins, Romulus and Remus. In an effort to, the story differs a little bit here as to how they end up orphaned, but there were political machinations in motion, I suppose you could say, because of their royal pedigree to keep them from the power, and they were basically left to the elements. Well, this is where the story gets really weird, if it hasn't already. A wolf, a she-wolf, takes the two and nurses them and raises them in their early years in a cave under the Capitoline Hill. This image of Romulus and Remus being suckled by the she-wolf is iconic throughout both the Republic period and the Empire period. It's well attested in the archaeological record from Britain all the way to Mesopotamia, and from the Germanic lands all the way into Ethiopia. Basically, you're going to find some representation of this. Long story short, when the planning phase for after they come to power and they grow, they're supposed to be great in stature, and again, looking through this from the biblical lens, you've got the divine pedigree and you've got the human pedigree. Well, there's your hybrid Nephilim. So very much in keeping with what we know about the behavior of giants, they're politically ambitious, and they get into an argument over who's going to rule this city. And in an act of defiance, Romulus built a wall around his portion of the city, and Remus, another act of defiance, jumps the wall. And the stories differ, but most of them say that Romulus killed his brother Remus to take the kingship of Rome. Now, this is interesting, too, because actually we have the list of the first Roman kings before Rome was a republic. We have a list of the 7 kings from the records that the Roman antiquarians kept. And the first one is named Romulus. So it's sort of analogous to having the Sumerian kings list with Gilgamesh's name on it. So we know that there was a historical Romulus, and if we were to believe Livy, then all the supernatural things that occurred in conjunction with their birth, life, and Romulus's ascendancy bear closer observation and consideration, I think, too. And amidst, a worldwide pandemic, this tomb was discovered by a team of archaeologists from Spain and Italy, I think. And there's still, I would imagine, they're drawing this first phase to a close, but there was a 2-year period of investigation before the Park Service in Italy would allow that particular feature to be open to the public for tourism and things like that. So again, you've got this window when, clearly the archaeologists are doing their thing, they're doing their research, but what else is going on? And, what were the occupants of the tomb that may have escaped, proper attention as well? And I suspect that includes, genetic material.
Yeah.
Timing seems interesting yet again too. It's just right in the middle of, or the beginning of the pandemic. It's like the article I'm looking at talking about this find is February 25th, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Coincidence or not, that shuts down anybody really going, anybody really seeing, and more importantly, anybody really focusing or hearing about this, because the world's looking at the shiny thing. It's crazy. Like, you just got to wonder where these things go.
Yeah.
And I know we like to talk about governments, but the deeper we get into these things, Judd, the deeper we go down the rabbit hole, it feels more like factions, not official government business, but factions of, globalists, of corporations, whatever it may be, however you want to classify it, that are kind of pulling strings in getting to the relics, to the sources of ancient knowledge, ancient power, watcher technology, and perhaps even, the ability to extract DNA, which we know then is going to be what they would consider to be divine, but we know to be the meddling of angelic and human
Certainly.
DNA, right?
And you can, when you consider that the 3 personages we talked about have been arguably the founders of not just early in the case of Egypt and Mesopotamia, but the formidable political and social power that these empires wielded, Rome being the latest one.
Is it? Wait, let me think about it. Are these 3 of the civilizations in the prophecy in Revelation, when you have like the bronze and iron? We're just missing Greece here. Are these the? I mean, I don't remember if Egypt's in it or not. This is going to really reflect poorly on my prophetic knowledge, but I know that we have Babylon. I know we have Rome. And the statue with iron, bronze, and
Persia, Greece, Rome.
Yeah, Persia. Okay.
Egypt may have been in there. Clearly, these were all empires that were.
Well, they were beast empires, right? This is
Mesopotamia and Egypt figured highly in the Old Testament, and Rome was prominent in the New Testament.
Right, it's the empires of the beast. Who did we talk with? Was it was this Derek or Gary Wayne? Nate.
That was Gary Wayne we talked about.
The empires of the beast
empires,
yeah. And that again, not coincidental, right? You have these founders, the founding fathers of these beast empires. It's obvious what's going on here.
It almost feels like, Judd and Luke, that if you have a certain amount of power in our world, in our society, eventually you sort of get courted or you get seduced to pick a side. I don't think very many people who are in control or have a sway on culture and humanity don't have some sort of moment in their life where they aren't approached by somebody or some system that tries to influence them to make these decisions, because this has been going on since the dawn of time. And I think there's a narrative on our show, and we've talked about it. No matter what it is, if it's a giant skeleton that some farmer digs up, it just goes missing, right? If it's a body of a Bigfoot, it goes missing. If it's knowledge of a UFO, it's covered up. It seems like all the knowledge is just constantly being swept under the rug. And I don't think that's all just happenstance. Well, yeah, things just go disappearing because there's some government agency. It's like, no, there is a concerted effort to keep everyone in the dark all the time.
Yeah.
As confused as possible. And I don't think that if you're as influential as someone like Elon Musk, that you don't have some moment where you're made aware of that.
Yeah, clearly. His recent takeover of Twitter, maybe a commentary on that.
Good or bad, right?
We don't know yet.
Hopefully good, but we'll see.
I just think like these people were all like implicated on flight logs going to Epstein's Island, and lo and behold, what's going on there?
Mm-hmm.
And the more you get into it, it's all blurry.
Yeah, it does get blurry. But thankfully, in the case, like you were talking about, people riding on the Woolite Express to Epstein Island, there are testimonies and document trails that those people can't hide from, obviously.
Yeah. There is the same lust for power that's been going on since the beginning.
Yeah.
And knowledge, right? So when you get to a certain level of money, what do you want next? You've got everything you could buy. Well, the next thing is having some sort of godlike power, right? So is it just that lust and that burning that's been going on since the dawn of time, that the elites, they just want power and they need something new, some new drug that money just can't quite, like, okay, cool, I can become a politician, have some control, but what I really want, some sort of spiritual moment.
Yeah, and I think that there are plenty of people that are pursuing that level of power. I think it's going to ensure them, some sort of immortality and power to go along with it, but it won't.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's the age-old, it's the crossroads scenario, like Robert Johnson used to sing about. That's he's talking about what the devil offers, all of, he did it with Adam and Eve. He did it with Jesus, in the Temple Mount. And these guys have money and power, and it lasts for a little while, but it's all ephemeral.
It's almost like in terms of just financial success and things. It's almost like they do get some temporary success. They do get some benefit from what they're doing. And you look at a lot of the people who are like you were saying in the beginning of this episode, pursuing the truth and trying to put out the real message and proclaim the real king of the world. Those people get blasted. Like Heiser said on our episode, it's always the person of Jesus that they're attacking and they're trying to take down, because he's the true king. We're talking about the kings on this episode. That is the king, and
that is the only God king.
And if you are loyal to him, you're going to have fire coming at you. They're going to try to take you down, take you out. And if it's the opposite is true, if Satan's liking some of these elites because they're, leave them alone, let them be successful because they're doing my work.
Mm.
Sign of success is not necessarily a good thing. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast.
That is a whole other podcast. Judd.
Yeah.
Dude, I love these. This is just like, it makes you want to sit and think about things you haven't thought about.
Yeah, me too, perpetually.
Yeah, and just kind of ponder and marinate on, it's eye-opening in a lot of ways, because I think once you have the blinders off, or once you've taken the red pill, people it's real common now, people talk about that from the Matrix, take the red pill, you never go back, right? You start looking at things in a way that isn't just like, oh, this is what they're saying, so this has got to be it, right? This is, oh yeah, they just happened to, do X, Y, Z. They found this too, and it just happened to be an invasion. The things that are happening around us are not only accelerating, but they hide in plain sight now. Maybe they have always, and we've just been really blind to it until people start waking up. And I feel like we are in a period of people waking up, and hopefully they wake up faster than they are at the moment. But these are just we love you, man. We appreciate these enlightening conversations, because it continues to build upon the place that Nate and I are driving this thing. Is to you ask the hard questions, talk about the weird stuff, and try to bring light into the places of darkness. People can understand and can look at world events and creatures and things that don't make a lot of sense through a biblical lens. And man, I'll tell you what, 10 out of 10 times, it makes sense when you look at it like that.
Yeah.
No, that isn't a coincidence. We talk about coincidences not being coincidences. That is not a coincidence either.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
gosh,
Yeah,
that's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got DJ B back in the mix.
Yeah.
We were thinking about we needed to put out the old bat spotlight.
Bird signal.
The birds.
The bird signal.
Oh, we got it, dude. It was on, and you answered the call.
Birdman. We got to get you. See, Luke and I were, selfishly, we were like talking when we couldn't find the Birdman. We were like, we got a lot of Blurry Creature episodes to do with Judd. This isn't.
Yeah. This is not okay.
This is not okay. There are many more coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Judd, you know what? You get healthy, buddy.
Yeah, you better.
Or we're gonna come find you.
Yeah, I'm working on that, man. And people have been kind with donations and stuff like that. And if people want to, I'm not out of the woods yet. My medical bills are piling up. So if you feel led to help me out, you can. I've got the PayPal account that I have is associated with my email address, professorburton@yahoo.com, and I do have a donate button on the Institute webpage, the Institute for Biblical Anthropology.
All right, that's awesome. I was going to ask you that exact thing, Judd.
But more than anything, keep the prayers rolling.
Dude, we want to help you, support you any way we can, and it's.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm just humbled and honored.
He wants to get back into the study and start slaying books and writing.
Right, dude, and
slaying some books. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's always hard to go through those valleys and go through the desert, but you know when you're going through the desert that there's a reason you're going through it. And man, it's good to have you guys in my corner and be friends with you guys and have this community with Blurry Creatures. Because it just seems like if it ain't me, it's somebody else that's associated in our friends that are going through the grinder.
Yep.
And it's just been a grind.
Yeah,
and I think that's because we're all pot committed to the truth, and we want to get it out as much as possible. And people are constantly telling us how they found like-minded people. So, Judd, you were kind enough to hop into the Blurry tank early,
early, yeah.
And you splashed it better than anyone. So,
well, it's my pleasure. I'm honored to be part of the Blurryverse.
We love you, man, and dude, it's awesome. Like, it's funny. This is one of the threads we've been pulling, right? I can't help but think that, like we mentioned earlier, that we go from the word origins and Rafa, and we have a capstone now of pulling that thread all the way to the tombs of the God Kings being discovered, and excited to see what we get next down the road here, because we pull a lot of threads with you, Judd, and this is a fun one too, because it's funny how things line up. As always, we appreciate you for your knowledge and for the things you bring to the table, and just get to tap into that brain a little bit. And we just thank you for sharing, as always, just dropping knowledge on just a couple of knuckleheads here in Tennessee.
Well, we lost
awesome.
Everyone out there listening to this podcast. Go support the doc, the good doc. Go to his website. He's got his email there. Shoot him a PayPal tip. Help Judd out. He's a good guy. He's been super kind and generous to us so many episodes.
So we lost Judd into the Blurry sphere, but
he's chasing the nurses.
He's out there. He's just living. LIVIN, baby.
just living. Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to Blurry Creatures, and it's good to get Judd back on the show, Luke.
It is. Yeah.
Good to hear his voice, and we got a little coast to coasty on that one, and just thank you for all you guys out there supporting us, and guys like Judd, Heiser, and Tim, and Derek, and Doug, and all the guys that are in our sphere who are trudging through this thick mud of weird content and truth and trying to make sense of it all. I mean, we're lucky to be in this tank, Luke, because sometimes it's like when Judd's rattling off facts and locations and dates and history and empires, I'm just like, I didn't pay attention enough in high school,
Right into the deep end, baby.
All right. It's just like, okay, where's the Bigfoot encounter?
Right.
That's what I'm waiting for.
Well, Nate?
Yeah.
But a good one.
It's a good one.
Good to have Judd back.
What are you going to do, Luke?
I'm going to roll that time.